The record should reflect that the jury is back in the courtroom. Everyone may be seated, please. Welcome back, members of the jury. Good morning to all of you. Good morning. Everybody doing okay? Yes. Great. All right. Thank you for coming back, and thank you for being on time once again. I indicated yesterday that the first step in the proceedings was opening statements, and yesterday you heard opening statements from both parties. The next step in the proceedings is the part of the proceedings where the prosecution gets to present evidence. And so at this time, I'm going to ask the prosecution if they're ready to proceed. Ms. Tish McGuire, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may call your first witness.
The people call Katie Medley.
Could I have you raise your right hand for me? Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, please be seated. Could you please tell us your full name?
It's Katie Marie Medley.
And can you spell your first name, your middle name, and your last name?
It's Katie, Marie-Medley.
Thank you. Ms. Tish McGuire, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. Were you at the Century 16 movie theater on July 19th of 2012 in Aurora, Colorado?
Yes, it was.
And did that go into the early morning of July 20th of 2012?
Yes, it did.
Now, can you please tell us about what you remember about the day of July 19th prior to going to the movie theater that day? And I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second, Miss Medley. Could you pull the microphone close to you? Oh, you don't have it. Let me give it for you.
I was wondering, I was going to speak into it.
Thank you.
Okay, just pull it down. Is that better? Can everybody hear me? Okay.
All right, I apologize. So I was just asking you if you could please tell the jury about what you remember about the day of July 19th prior to going to the movies that day.
Well, in the afternoon, me and my husband were together. We had a little apartment there in Aurora, and we were just sitting and watching TV, and we were expecting a friend to come down to visit from our hometown. And I remember my husband, Caleb Medley, was watching the commercial for the new Batman movie. And we had decided earlier on that we weren't going to go, and then I watched him watch that commercial, and his eyes were glued to the TV, and I was like, okay, he wants to go. So we decided that when our friend came up that we would be attending that night.
And could you please spell your husband's name for the record?
Middle name also, or just?
Sure, his full name, thank you.
Okay. Caleb Levimedley.
And were you able to purchase tickets for the movie for that day?
Yeah, we decided to purchase early because we wanted to make sure that we had a seat. So we went in the early afternoon after we discussed it, and it was maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon when we went, and we purchased tickets for myself, Caleb, and for our friend Ashley Kurz.
And could you please spell Ashley Kerr's name for the record?
It's ASHLEYKURZ.
And when you say we went to purchase tickets, who was we?
Caleb and myself went in his car.
And do you remember who drove?
Caleb did.
Okay. And were you able to purchase tickets when you got to the movie theater?
Yes, it was pretty easy.
And were you able to return to the movie theater later that night?
Yes, we were.
Okay. Do you remember how you got to the movie theater that night?
We drove in Caleb's car.
And do you remember who drove?
Caleb did.
Okay. And when you got to the movie theater, do you remember where you parked?
I do.
Okay, and where was that?
If you're looking at the front of the theater, we parked off to the side of the building on the right.
Okay. And what happened when you got to the movie theater?
Well, we decided to go early. We got there about 10 o'clock because, we thought there would be a big line where we come from. We have a small movie theater, so if you don't get there early, you don't get a good seat. So we got there fairly early, and we went in, and there was hardly anybody there. There were no lines or anything. So we went in, and we decided to go to the arcade for a while until it got closer to the time of the movie.
And were you playing games in the arcade? What were you doing in the arcade?
We played games for a while. I can't remember exactly what games we played, but we just played games to pass the time before we took our seat.
And who is with you at this time when you're in the arcade?
It was me and Caleb and Ashley.
And about what time do you think you went into the theater?
It was probably around 11:30.
And do you remember what theater number you went into?
We went into Theater 9.
And how did you go about picking your seats when you got into Theater 9?
Well, we went in and we looked around to see where, was full and what was not, and the upper section was pretty full already. And because I was 9 months pregnant, we decided to try and pick a seat that in case I went into labor, that would be close exit.
So the day that you were viewing the Batman Prayer, you were 9 months pregnant.
I was 9 months pregnant, and I was about a week away from my due date. I was due to be induced that Sunday, which would have been the 22nd of July.
Now, once you were able to find your seats, do you remember what you did while you were waiting for the movie to begin?
Well, as we were standing there, I decided I wanted to sit in the middle, and Caleb and Ashley fought over what seat they were going to sit in, and Caleb ended up sitting on my left side, and Ashley ended up sitting on my right side. And from then on, we just kind of chatted. We saw a lot of people coming in and out of the theater at that point, and it was a lot of chatting and people just very excited to see the movie.
Do you remember seeing anything unusual at all before the movie began?
For us, it was that there were a lot of children in that theater.
Anything else unusual that you remember?
Not at that time, no.
So at any point in time, were there previews before the movie started?
There were previews. The only one I can remember was that there was a preview for The Hobbit.
And why were you remembering that?
Because that was the last time I spoke to Caleb.
And what did you say?
I don't exactly remember. I told him that I really wanted to see that movie when it came out. And he agreed. He wanted to see it as well. And before the movie started, that was the last thing I said to him.
And then at some point in time, did your movie begin?
Yes, it did. Our movie came on at 12:05 because they had different theaters going and they all started at different times.
And what movie was that?
What movie did we see?
Yes.
Sorry. We went to see The Dark Knight Rises, the Batman movie.
And is that the movie that began approximately at 12:05?
Yes.
Now, at some point in time, did your movie become interrupted?
Yes, it did.
Approximately how long into your movie was it before it became interrupted?
Seemed very early on, like maybe 15 or 20 minutes.
Do you have any recollection of what scene was playing at the time?
The last scene that I remember seeing was Christian Bale was on the screen and they were opening up some kind of safe with some pearls with Anne Hathaway. She was there too, but that's all I remember.
So now what happened in theater number 9 that you were in that you remember at that point in time?
Well, we were just watching the movie and I noticed that the exit to our right opened up. I saw a little bit of light come through and I saw a canister go into the air at that time.
So can you say that again? Sorry.
Sorry, I saw a canister. I saw somebody step in and throw a canister into the air.
Okay, so tell us about what you saw in terms of somebody stepping in the movie theater.
Well, I saw somebody step in and the canister was thrown over our heads. And at that moment, I was leaning to Ashley to tell her, I think someone's playing a prank right now. Like someone's going to do a prank. It's going to be really funny, you know. And as he stepped in, I just knew something was very wrong. It was almost like it was in slow motion as the canister was going over. He stepped in the doorway, and I knew something was wrong, so I put my arm around Ashley, and I threw her to the ground.
And what do you remember after you threw Ashley to the ground?
I remember the canister exploding somewhere behind us, and that the gunshots started immediately after.
And do you have any experience with firearms?
We grew up with them. We lived in a small town, and my parents had them and taught us about them.
Had you ever heard gunfire before?
Yes.
Is what you heard in that night at the theater on July 19th and July 20th of 2012 consistent with the gunfire that you have experience hearing?
Yes.
And so what did that sound like to you at the time?
It was just a lot of gunfire. It was clear. It was gunshots, a lot of them.
Now, could you see anything from where you were on the floor at that time, or could you just hear things?
Well, as I was going down to the floor with Ashley, I saw him step in. He was wearing a mask and Kevlar, and I saw him with a gun, and it was a longer gun, and I could see that there was a scope on there also.
And you had a clear view of that at the time?
I did.
Okay.
It happened really fast, so it's hard to describe, but yeah.
Now, you've been testifying in terms of you saw him. At the time, did you know if it was a male or a female?
No, I did not. And we didn't know if there were more than one either. We just knew I just saw that one person.
Did you see anyone other than that one person?
No.
So what do you remember after you saw that and you and Ashley were on the ground?
So we were kind of huddled together laying on the ground, and I turned to my left to talk to my husband to decide what we were going to do next. And that's when I saw that he was still sitting in his chair. I saw that his shoes were on the ground and like his feet were on the ground, and he was still sitting in his chair. And I couldn't understand why he was sitting in his chair when someone was shooting. You know, he should have been on the ground with us.
And what do you remember after seeing him? Were you able to see him clearly at that point in time, or could you just tell that he was sitting in the chair?
At that moment, I could tell he was sitting in the chair, and then I looked up because I wanted to ask him, like, what are you doing? Why are you still sitting in the chair? And that's when I saw blood pouring from his face, and I knew that he had been shot in the head.
And what do you remember after you saw that?
I remember that he wasn't breathing, and that I told Ashley that Caleb is dead. They said he's dead. He's been shot in the head.
And what'd you do after you told Ashley that?
We stayed crouched on the ground because there was still a lot of gunfire happening. So we just crouched down waiting because we thought that the shooter was going to come row by row and just kill us.
And then what do you remember while you guys were down crouched on the ground after that?
It's a little confusing to put all together just because it was a lot that was happening. I remember that the air was very thick and it was hard to breathe, and that it was hard to stay crouched because I was so pregnant. I was trying not to lay on my stomach. I remember at one point that I saw the shooter walk by our row, and we believe that he went out into the lobby of the theater.
Now, you said you believe that. Did you actually see that, or is that just what you were guessing at the time?
That's what I assumed at the time because I saw I saw him walk by.
Okay, and so when you say by, was that kind of like it rose behind you?
It was like we were laying on the ground, and I guess from my point of view it would have been right here because we were on the edge of that row. So we saw feet. I saw him walk by, and I assumed that he went out into the lobby at that time.
So after you thought that he had walked into the lobby, what do you remember after that?
I remember that there were a group of people who ran by our seats, and that there was a lot of gunfire again, and we saw them go to the ground. We weren't sure if they had been shot or if they were just crouching on the ground to avoid the gunfire.
And what do you remember after seeing them crouched to the ground?
I remember that we were laying on the ground, and we looked behind us, the row behind us, and there was a boy laying on the ground. I don't know how old he was. He was a little bit older, maybe 18 or 19, and someone was laying on top of him, and he just kept on staring at us. We all just kept on staring at each other because we didn't know what to do at that time.
What do you remember after seeing him?
Well, at one point I asked Ashley to call 911, and she said that she had heard other people in the theater already calling 911. And when it got quiet again, I decided to slowly stand up, and I saw that Caleb was actually breathing again. And so I decided he had a lot of blood pouring into his mouth, and he was choking on all of his blood. So I took the bottle of water that he actually purchased earlier, and I poured it in his face to try and get the blood out of his face.
And what do you remember after doing that?
I remember that, sorry, I just need a minute. I remember that there were, the exit door actually opened again, and there were cops at the door that time, and they were yelling and screaming at us to come out of the exit door. Sorry.
Nope, take your time. And what do you remember after the cops told you to come through the exit door?
Well, I told Ashley that we had to make a decision. I could stay or go, but because I was so pregnant, I had to save our unborn child, because I thought Caleb was going to die, and I thought to myself, that's going to be the last piece of him that I have to save him. So I grabbed Caleb's hand, and he actually squeezed my hand, and I told him that I loved him and that I would take care of our baby if he didn't make it.
And what do you remember after that?
We ran towards the exit, and we jumped over people that were laying on the ground. I don't know if they were alive or not, but we jumped over their bodies, and we ran to the exit, and I was wearing flip-flops, so I remember as we were running out the exit door that I slipped in blood, and the cop actually caught me because it was a lot of blood.
And what do you remember after the cop catching you and you slipping on blood? What did you do after that?
They set us out on the curb. It was me and Ashley, and then there was a couple out there also, and at one point there was a girl who actually came out and sat next to us also. We know her as Jansen Young now.
At the time, you had just met her for the first time.
Yeah, I didn't know her name. I didn't know her name for a long time, actually.
Okay. And so what happened when you were sitting out on the curb?
They started to bring injured out. The cops started to pull people out onto the sidewalk. And some people they started to load into the car. I remember them loading one girl, and they said, I don't think that she's going to make it. I don't think she's going to make it to the hospital.
And what do you remember after that?
I remember that they pulled Caleb out onto the sidewalk, and that I could see that he was still breathing, but they had to lay him on his face because of all the blood that was just pouring, and so they didn't want him to aspirate.
And then what happened to Caleb when he was out there on the sidewalk?
We actually got moved before we were able to see him loaded anywhere. I had no idea what had happened to him at that time.
So they didn't let you stay with your husband on the sidewalk?
We stayed on the curb for just a few minutes, enough for me to talk to Jansen. She had come out and she sat next to me, and she told me that I think my boyfriend is dead. She's like, I'm pretty sure that he's dead. And I hugged her because I didn't know what else to do. We were all just in shock, not believing this was happening. And so I put my arm around her, and I remember that when I took my arm off her, that there were chunks of blood and of him on me.
And what do you remember after that?
The cop who was with us told us that we had to move out of the location where we were at because they were worried that there was a bomb in a car right near where we were sitting.
And where did they take you after that?
They took us to, it was more towards like the front of the building, but at the back of the parking lot. And that was the last time I saw Caleb at that time for many hours.
And did you know what had happened to Caleb at that point in time?
No,
So at some point in time, were you moved from the theater to another location?
I was.
And where were you taken?
We were taken to the high school, a high school. I don't know. They bussed us up to a high school. They made sure there was a small group of us that knew we had severely injured people that we were with, and they took us in a special group up to the high school first.
And what happened when you were at the high school?
They took us into the gym and gave us water, and I really had to use the bathroom because I was so pregnant. So they escorted me and Ashley to the bathroom, and I remember that I had a lot of blood on my hands from Caleb, and I couldn't scrub hard enough to get it all off.
And at some point in time, were you interviewed by police officers at Gateway High School?
I was.
And then eventually, were you able to leave Gateway High School early that morning?
I was. After chatting with my mom, I had called them earlier when I was outside of the theater. I called my mom, and that was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, was calling my parents and calling Caleb's parents, because they all thought that I was calling to tell them that I was going into labor. And instead, I got to tell them all that Caleb had been shot and was probably dead.
So after you were at Gateway High School, you were able to call, and were you able to get someone to come get you, or?
Yeah, I talked to my mom, and she told me that Caleb had been taken into surgery and that he was alive, and they came to pick us all up, me and Ashley.
And where were you taken?
They took us to University Hospital.
And what did you learn when you got to University Hospital?
That Caleb had been out of surgery, but then they had to take him back in before I got there again. So by the time that I arrived at the hospital, he was already in his second surgery.
And then what else happened after his second surgery?
Well, it was probably between 7 and 9 hours that surgery was, so we had to sit there all day just waiting for him. When the doctor finally came out, he made it pretty clear that Caleb was alive, but that it was bad, and that he had lost his right eye, and that he suffered significant brain damage.
Now, at any point in time, did you know if you had been injured?
I know that at one point when we were in the theater and we were laying on the ground, that something came through the front of our seat, and that I got nicked in the back of the head, and then Ashley had a big burn on her face. But I did go get that checked out when I got to the hospital, and I had to be checked up because they were worried that I was going to go into labor also.
So after you were waiting for 9 hours of Caleb's second surgery, and then the doctors told you that it was going to be pretty bad, what else happened in the following days?
Well, I was scheduled to be induced on July 22nd, and I decided that I wanted to go ahead and be induced that day because the sooner we could get Hugo here, the better, because at that point, he was coming no matter what.
And who's Hugo?
Oh, Hugo is our son, who is now almost 3 years old.
So at what date was it that you got induced at the hospital?
I was induced Sunday night on the 22nd.
Okay. And what was happening to Caleb at the time you were induced?
They told us that in the morning that he would be going in for another brain surgery, so that was his third.
So was Caleb able to be there for the birth of your child?
No, he was literally in brain surgery when I was in labor.
And how long was your labor?
It was between 37 and 40 hours. It was around that time.
And then when you got out of labor, was Hugo okay?
He was okay. He took enough time to get here, though.
And after you were finished with labor, and were you okay after your labor?
I was exhausted because our whole family had not slept since the night of the shooting. Caleb's parents, the night of the shooting, they had to drive 2 hours to get here. Can you imagine that? Being them, trying to get here. But everyone was exhausted because they were going back and forth between Caleb's room on the floor below mine where I was having the baby.
And then were you able to see Caleb after you got out of labor?
I did. It was about 3 hours after Caleb got to hold his son for the first time, but he was not awake for that.
And when you say he wasn't awake, what kind of state was Caleb in at the time?
He was in a medically induced coma
And how long was Caleb in a coma for?
for 4 weeks.
And what happened after 4 weeks?
They decided to finally move him out of neuro ICU. He was very critical for those 4 weeks, and they decided they wanted to move him to what's called an LTAC hospital, which is kind of an in-between hospital between ICU and going into rehab.
And were they able to do that?
Were they able to do that?
To move him to that other hospital?
Yes, we were.
And how long was he at that hospital for?
He was at that hospital for 30 days, and they finally started to wean him off of the medications that he was on for the medically induced coma, so he started to wake up a little bit.
And when did Caleb finally come out of his coma?
It was in that 30 days that he finally started to come out. I don't remember the exact day.
And after he was at that hospital, where did he have to go after that?
He went to Craig Hospital for 3 months after that.
And was he inpatient at the hospital for those whole 3 months?
Yes, he was.
So what happened to your family during that time?
Well, we have a very supportive family, and all of us stayed up there for 6 months, essentially. We stayed at a townhouse and in a hotel, and then when he got to Craig Hospital, we stayed in Craig Hospital. They have a separate apartment for families there.
And what happened after Caleb was released from Craig Hospital?
We got to go home the day before Caleb's birthday, and we went home to a new house that we had never been in before because after the shooting happened, I could never go back to our apartment. I couldn't bear seeing the crib there and knowing that it would never be the same.
And what injuries did Caleb have when he was released from Craig Hospital?
He had the traumatic brain injury that he had the shotgun pellets, essentially, is what happened. He hit him in the face, and it went through his right eye. And when he had brain surgery, they took out this part of his brain. So because the right side of your brain controls the left side of your body, he has weakness on the left side. He has speech problems.
Can Caleb walk?
Caleb cannot walk.
Can Caleb talk?
He can more now than then.
Now, before you walked into the theater on July 19th of 2012, what was Caleb like?
He was an aspiring comedian, very funny. He was doing stand-up comedy the night before we went to the theater.
Could he walk?
He could walk.
Could he talk?
Yes.
Did he have any impairments at all?
No.
Your Honor, at this time I'd like to approach the witness and show her what's been marked for identification purposes as People's Exhibit 1145.
Okay, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Do you recognize that diagram that I just handed you?
Yes.
Okay, and what is that?
It's the picture of the inside of the movie theater.
Okay, and do you recognize the writing on that diagram?
I do. It's mine.
Okay, and is your name on there, and is there a date on there?
My name is on there, and yes, there is a date.
And what's the date?
It is 11/19 of 14.
Okay, and do you recall meeting with me and an investigator and filling out that diagram?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and does that diagram show where you were seated in the theater and other things you observed in the theater?
It does. Looking back, I do see that I put our seats in the wrong place.
Okay, All right, I have given you some pens up there. Would you please go ahead and circle where your correct seats were?
Okay.
Okay, and Your Honor, may I show defense counsel that?
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you.
And does that diagram fairly and accurately represent what you remember being in the theater and the things that you observed in the theater that night?
It does.
Your Honor, at this time, I would move for the admission of People's Exhibit 1145.
Is there any objection?
There's not.
Without objection, People's Exhibit 1145 is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. May we publish it to the jury?
You may publish it.
Thank you. All right, so if you could please describe for the jury what you drew on your diagram there.
Where you see the initials A, K, and C, that is where I thought that me and Caleb and Ashley were sitting, but it was actually just the row behind that is where we were sitting. I drew where the shooter entered the building and where we entered and where I saw the canister go to.
All right. Now, you had just circled some new seats that you just made. Where are those seats located?
They're the seats directly behind the A, K, and the C. They're the three seats directly behind that.
Okay, and when you say behind, is it closer to where that row 8 is on the diagram?
Yes,
Okay, so the same exact seats, just one row behind you.
correct.
Okay, and that's where you remember to be seated that day.
Yes,
And why is your memory now that you were seated there in those seats?
because I knew I was going to have to testify, and I was thinking about it a lot. But as soon as I saw this diagram this morning, I knew that those seats weren't the right seats. I also knew it because there was a family sitting in front of us with their children.
And directly in front of you? In this-
Directly in front of us. I remember a male and a female, and I remember at least 2 children.
Okay, now on that diagram, you have a place of where you entered the theater?
Yes, that was from the lobby.
Okay, so you guys came up there and then found your seats when you got in the theater?
Yes,
Okay, and then you also have on that diagram a thing that says shooter entered,
yes,
all right? And is that where you saw that figure entered that you told the jury about earlier?
yes. That's where I saw the door open and the canister thrown from there, and the person with the gun.
Right? And you have a thing there that says C1 and C2. What is that about?
That's where I believe that's where I saw him throw the canister. Is C1. C2 is where it went over our heads, and I'm not sure where it landed, but I knew that it had landed somewhere behind us.
And then you have another place on there where you say that you saw a shooter a second time.
So when we saw him leave out into the lobby, that's when we saw him leave out into the lobby. That's what the shooter the second time, that's where I saw him.
Okay? And then you have a place on there that says I and Ashley exited here.
So down by the stairs is where we jumped over people right there. And down where I put me and Ashley exited, that's where the cops came in the door. And that's where we ran out.
Okay? And where does that leave you when you go out that exit? Where do you go?
It goes out to the parking lot.
Great, thanks. Your Honor, at this time, if I may approach the witness with People's Exhibit 4670.
Yes.
All right, what did I just hand you?
You handed a picture of me at the high school that morning.
Do you recognize that photograph?
I recognize myself. I don't remember taking this photograph.
And did you take it yourself?
No.
Do you remember if when police officers interviewed, they took photographs?
They did. I remember them taking a picture of my friend. I don't remember taking this picture, though.
Did it fairly and accurately represent what you looked like on July 20th of 2012 at Gateway High School that day?
Other than not being able to see that I was so pregnant, yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would move for the admission of People's Exhibit 4670.
Any objection? No. Without objection, People's Exhibit 4670 is admitted and may be published.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, at this time, if I may approach the witness with People's Exhibits 2117, 2118, 4569, and 2540.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, now if you could look at the first photograph that I just handed you, and there's a number on it, if you could just tell the jury what number you're looking at for that first photograph.
It's 2117.
Okay, and do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, that's a picture of my husband, Caleb Medley, in ICU at University Hospital.
Okay, and does it fairly and accurately represent what Caleb looked like at that point in time at University Hospital?
Yes.
And to be clear, this is after the shooting.
This was after the shooting, yes.
Okay. And then if you could tell me about the next photograph and state that number.
The number is 2118. It's a picture of where where they cut into his head when they did brain surgery. And also on the front of them, his forehead, you can see where some of the shotgun pellets were at.
And does that picture fairly and accurately represent to you what Caleb looked like after the shooting at University Hospital?
Yes.
Okay. If you could tell the jury about the next photograph and state the number first, please.
The number is 4569. It's also a picture of him in ICU after having surgery. This was a little bit, I think, after, like 2 weeks at least, after he had surgery.
And did it fairly and accurately represent what Caleb looked like 2 weeks after he had surgery at University Hospital?
Yes.
And then what is the last photograph that I handed you?
It's number 2540.
And what is that photograph?
This is a picture of Caleb right after the shooting.
Now, did you have an opportunity to observe Mr. Medley in the theater to see what he looked like after the shooting?
Yes, he looked a lot worse than this picture actually shows. He had a lot more blood on his face when I saw him last.
But did it fairly and accurately represent does that picture fairly and accurately represent what he looked like right after the shooting on July 20th of 2012?
He looked worse than this photo.
But other than the
Yes, sorry, yes.
All right, Your Honor, at this time I would move for the admission of all of those exhibits.
Is there any objection to those exhibits being admitted, Ms. Spengler?
Your Honor, we do not object to 2117 or 2118. I would make a 403 objection to 4569 and 2540.
Would counsel please approach?
Sure.
The objections to exhibits 4569 and 2540 are overruled based on my previous rulings. So exhibits 2117, 2118, 4569, and 2540 are all admitted and may be published at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you very much, Ms. Medley. Could you please tell the jury about Caleb's condition today?
He's still in a wheelchair right now. He's working on walking. His speech is getting better, but it's taken us almost 3 years to get that far.
And when you say his speech is better, what is Caleb's speech like?
He can say words, but it's hard to understand because of the brain injury. It affected his speech.
And how does Caleb communicate with you?
Most family members can understand him okay because we're around him, but other people have a hard time sometimes understanding him.
Does Caleb have any tools that he used to help communicate with people who don't understand his speech?
He has a notebook that has the letters of the alphabet, and he can spell everything.
So if people ask him questions, can Caleb spell out the answers?
Yes, and he completely understands what you're saying also.
So he has complete understanding of questions. It's just a matter of his ability to speak back and other people to understand him.
Yes, that's correct.
Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
All right, I just have a couple questions from things that you talked about earlier. You spoke about the fact that when you were in the theater, you were surprised about how many children were there.
Yes.
When you were out earlier in the arcade area, do you recall if you saw any children out in that area earlier?
There were some kids running around. I couldn't tell you exactly what they looked like or anything.
But you have a specific memory of seeing them out in that earlier area by the arcade?
Yes.
Okay. And then also when you spoke about the fact that you were crouching down with Ashley during the shooting, do you recall, did you ever have a chance to see how close, let's say in feet, that shooter was to you at that time?
It was very close because we watched him walk by. So I would say 4 feet.
And did you have an opportunity at the time to observe anything that that person was wearing at the time?
When he stepped in the doorway, I saw that he was wearing a mask and Kevlar. He looked like someone from the SWAT team. I thought it was someone from the SWAT team for a second.
Anything else you remember about what that person was wearing?
I don't remember anything else about what he was wearing. He was wearing the mask and the Kevlar, and I remember the gun with the scope, and I remember a green laser also on that.
Okay. All right. I have no further questions. Thank you very much, Ms. Medley.
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I forgot, yes.
Yes, they have a chance to ask you questions.
That's right.
Ms. Spengler, do you have any cross-examination?
No questions.
All right. Give me just a second, see if the jurors have any questions. It doesn't look like they do. All right. May she be released from her subpoena?
From the People's Subpoena, yes. Thank you, Your Honor.
Any objection? All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would counsel please approach? Ms. Tish McGuire, call your next witness, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. The people call Caleb Medley, Your Honor.
All right. Members of the jury, with respect to the next witness, the prosecution is going to use an alphabet board so that he can communicate his answers to the questions. Mr. Medley will point to the letters, and then we're going to have Ms. Sturnich, who is in charge of all interpreters here at the courthouse, verbalize the answers or verbalize the letters that are being pointed to. Just right there. There's a witness stand right there, yeah. Let me first administer an oath to Ms. Sturnich, if I may. Ms. Sturnich, would you please raise your right hand? You solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that you will accurately, impartially, and to the best of your ability verbalize the answers provided by this witness? I do. All right, thank you. Sir, could I have you raise your right hand? You solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. All right, Ms. Tish McGuire, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. Could you please spell your name for the record?
C-A-L-E-B.
And could you spell your last name for the record, too?
M-E-D-L-E-Y.
Mr. Medley, are you married to Katie Medley?
Yeah.
And could you spell that answer for the record, please?
Y. E. S.
Mr. Medley, did you go to the Century 16 movie theater in Aurora, Colorado on July 19th of 2012? Could you spell that answer, please?
Y. E. S.
I have no further questions for this witness. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Spengler, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay, thank you. May he be released from his subpoena, Ms. Tish McGuire?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No.
All right, sir, thank you very much. Ms. Sturnich, thank you.
And Your Honor,
Call your next witness, please.
and Your Honor, before I do that, I had marked for identification purposes, for purposes of the record, the spell board as People's Exhibit 1194. At this time, I would ask for its admission.
Any objection to the alphabet board being admitted into evidence? All right. Without objection, Exhibit 1194 is admitted.
Your Honor, at this time, the people would call Munira Gravelli.
Could I have you raise your right hand for me, please? Do you solemnly swear from under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Okay, please be seated. you can hand me those pictures there. Thank you.
Good morning.
Hold
Will
on,
you-
hold on. Could you please tell us your full name?
Munira Fatime Gravelli,
Could you please spell your first name, your middle name, and your last name?
MUNIRFATIMIHGRAVELLY.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Were you at the Century 16 movie theater on July 19th of 2012?
Yes,
And did that go into the early morning of July 20th of 2012?
yes.
And what do you remember about the day of July 19th of 2012 before going to the movie theater that day?
Remember, I was really excited. My coworkers had been planning it for a few days to go. Since it was at midnight and they had to work the next day, they had to make this whole plan of how they would get any sleep afterward. So, yeah, everyone was really excited. Friend purchased most of the tickets,
And who was that friend?
Jesse Childress.
And who were your other coworkers that you were going to go to the movie with?
One was my superintendent, Derek Sproul, and his wife, Chi-Chi Sproul.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you to spell Derek's full name for the record, please.
DERICKSPRUEL.
And how do you spell Chi-Chi Sproul?
CHI, then SPRUEL.
And what about Jesse Childress?
JESSECHILDRESS.
And Jesse had purchased the tickets for that night?
He had.
Okay. And what were your plans to meet up with them at the movie theater?
I was only in Colorado temporarily, so I was at a hotel and I drove myself to the theater about 10:30. They said to meet them there in the front at 10:30.
Okay. And do you remember where you parked when you got to the theater?
It was on the side of the theater. That's all. It was the first time I'd ever been there, so I don't remember. It wasn't in the front. That's as much as I remember.
Okay. And what happened when you got to the theater?
I walked around to the front. Jesse and Derek were in the front, I believe, waiting for me.
And did they give you your ticket?
They did.
Okay. And then did you guys enter the theater?
Yes.
What happened when you went into the movie theater?
We stopped at the concession stand. I don't remember if I got anything. And then we went straight into the auditorium to find seats.
And do you remember what auditorium number you went into?
I've been told it was 9. At the time, I had no idea.
So you're not really exactly sure about the theater number?
No.
Okay. And how did you guys go about finding your seats?
We looked for ones in the stadium part. We didn't want to sit right up against the theater, and we found about half empty row, maybe 3 or 4 rows up into where the stadium seating starts.
And how did you choose your seats?
That's pretty much how we sat, mostly further to the right than the left, if you're looking at the screen.
Okay. And do you remember in what order you were seated?
Yes, it was, at the furthest end was Chi-Chi, then Derek, then Jesse, then myself.
And what did you do while you were waiting for the movie to begin?
We just sat and talked. You know.
Do you remember anything unusual at all happening prior to going to the movie theater?
No.
Okay. And at some point in time, do you remember if there were previews that started?
There were. I don't remember any of them.
And at some point in time, did your movie start?
Yes.
And about how long was it into your movie before your movie got interrupted?
I'd say about 15, 20 minutes.
Okay. And what do you remember what scene was playing when that happened?
Christian Bale was getting in a helicopter to go chase down the Catwoman character. That's the last thing I remember.
And I, at the time, forgot to ask you where you all worked together. So you said you were coworkers, but where did you work together?
We worked on a Buckley Air Force Base.
And what were your assignments there?
We were in communications, pretty much computer help desk type folks.
And did all four of you work together at Buckley Air Force Base?
All except Chi-Chi Sproul.
Okay. And who was Chi-Chi too?
Chi-Chi is Derek Sproul's wife.
Okay. So you were about 15 minutes into your movie, and what do you remember happening?
I remember seeing a canister fly across the screen, and there was smoke coming out of it, and it landed off to the left and behind me because I was looking back at it. And, I stared in that direction for a while, and then it exploded. And that's when, I'm sorry, my memory's
No, you're
kind of fuzzy.
you're fine. And how would you describe that canister?
It was small, and the sound it made when it hit the ground, it didn't sound like it was all that heavy. It sounded like if someone threw a soda can.
Did it make any other noises that you remember?
No, not until it exploded.
And what did it sound like when it exploded?
It sounded a little like gunfire. It made the same type of loud popping sound.
And after you remember kind of staring in that direction for a while, what do you remember happening next?
When it went off, the people it went off around, I remember seeing them all get up. And then I remember hearing, I believe it was Derek Sproul, but I don't know before, saying, "Get down." So I did. I slid out of my seat to get on the floor, and I stayed there pretty much the whole time. I remember I know there was gunfire going off like almost immediately after the canister exploded, but the movie was also still playing, so it was hard to tell the difference between the two.
And were you able to see anything when you were down on the ground?
No.
Were you able to hear anything when you were down on the ground?
Yes.
And what could you hear?
I heard all the gunfire and a lot of yelling, out of confusion, but then it shortly turned to screams. And I heard a lot of people calling other people's names. So that's mostly what I heard.
Now, could you smell anything in the theater at that time?
Yes.
What could you smell?
The gunpowder, definitely, but I don't know if whatever came from that canister, I guess I was smelling, but, I couldn't identify it. I couldn't say for sure.
Now, do you have any experience with firearms?
Yes.
And what is your experience with firearms?
In the Air Force, I've had to fire an M16 about 3-4 times, so I'm very familiar with the smell.
Of gunpowder?
Yes.
Okay, and are you experienced with the sound of gunpowder?
Yes.
Okay. And is what you heard in that theater consistent with your experience with firearms?
It is.
And is what you smelled that you believe to be gunpowder consistent with your experience with firearms?
Yes.
Okay. And were you able to discern at all what type of weapons were being used that you could hear?
No. No, I couldn't.
Do you remember the sound of what the weapons sounded like or the shots at the time?
Yes, from what I remember, there was a lot of time in between the first few shots, and then they were more rapid. that's about as much as I remember.
And do you remember if the gunfire was always consistent or if it ever stopped?
It did stop once.
Okay, and then what happened after it stopped?
I picked my head up a little bit, and I only remember seeing Derek Sproul's face, and he said very lowly to me, "See if you can get out." So I stayed on the ground and tried to slide around on my stomach, but the gunfire started again very shortly after, so I stopped and just laid there.
And do you remember what you did next after that?
I was just waiting for it to stop again, and when it finally did, I still didn't want to get up. But then the movie stopped shortly after the gunfire did, and then the lights came on. And then I could see down the aisle I was in, and I wouldn't have been able to get out anyway because there were bodies in it. And but there was also a girl on top of another woman, and she was saying the gunman is gone, the police are here. And I didn't really believe her, but I started to hear the policemen, or what I figured was them saying, if you're able to move, we need you to leave the theater. And they said it a lot. So I finally stood up and turned around. And I remember seeing Jesse Childress. He was face down on the floor. And I asked Derek, "Hey, is Jesse okay?" And he was shaking him and calling his name, but the policemen were still yelling at us to leave. So we did. I had to step over him to get out. But we we exited out the door that was next to the movie screen. And there were a lot of people and emergency vehicles out there already. And I remember the police had us sit on the curb, and they kept moving us further down the curb until while they tried to separate the injured from the not injured. And
Now, at that point in time, had you realized if you'd been injured?
yes, in the theater when I first got down, it felt like something hit my hand and it hurt, but I ignored it. And when I was finally outside again, my hand started to throb. So I looked at it, and it was very swollen and full of holes. So I don't think I had to tell anybody I was injured. I think this young girl, she was there with her mother, and they were trying to help people. She noticed that I was injured, and she told me to sit down and asked me, "Is there anybody I can call for you?" And I told her to call my mom. Well, at first I didn't. I said, "No, you can't call her. She's going to freak out." Because she was in Kansas, and she can't get here. She can't do anything. She's just going to drive her crazy. But she said, no. That's what they're there for, to freak out. So I had her call my mother. I don't remember exactly what I said to her. I just told her, no, as far as I knew, I was okay. The girl talked to her a little bit for me. She's like, she's speaking well. She's alert. So I wasn't able to call her back till some hours later.
And when you were outside, were you reunited at all with the people that you had gone to the movie with?
Just for a second. We only sat with each other on the curb for maybe a couple of minutes before they separated Derek and Chi-Chi because they weren't injured. And
And let me
then-
ask you a question. So
Okay.
is it just Derek and Chi-Chi that's out with you, or Jesse?
It is.
Had Jesse made it out of the theater?
No, I never saw him again after that, actually.
So after you guys got separated, what happened to you?
I was put into a police car in the front seat, and there was a young girl with an older man, I believe it was her dad, in the back, and her leg was injured. And they drove us to the children's hospital. It took a little while to get there because most of the theater parking lot and the exits were blocked by emergency vehicles. So he had to drive over grass and curbs and so on to find a way out of there.
What do you remember about that ride?
I remember the officer asked me what happened, and I just told him someone came in the theater and opened fire, and that's all I remember saying. And
Do you remember how quickly they got to the hospital?
it was fairly quickly. I can't imagine it took more than 10 minutes, probably less.
And what happened when you got to the hospital?
I got out of the vehicle and was put into a wheelchair, and they wheeled me into a room and, they had me undressed, and they put a dressing gown on me because they had to inspect everywhere because they told me I had a lot of blood everywhere, so they had to see if it was mine or not.
And what did they determine?
That most of it wasn't mine. I was hit in the hand, and I had nicks on up and down both arms and on my scalp. But they said that most of my face was covered, and I said, "Oh, it's probably because when I was on the ground in the theater, it was a pool of blood that my face ended up in. I thought it was maybe soda because it was dark, but when the lights came on, I saw it was blood, so it was mostly someone else's."
And did you know what you were nicked by for the places they told you that you were nicked?
No.
And then what sort of injuries were on your hand?
I had a lot of small holes, and they took an x-ray, and they told me they were buckshot pellets. There were 4 of them. They showed me the x-ray. There were 4 of them in my hand. So I after that, I guess that's what nicked me.
And what did they have to do with your hand?
Because it was so swollen, they couldn't operate on it then. They gave me a referral, and a week later, once the swelling had gone down a little bit, they sent me to another hospital to have them removed.
And to be clear, what hand are we talking about?
Left hand.
Okay. And what hospital did you go to have those pellets removed?
Advantage something. I don't remember exactly.
And were they able to remove your pellets?
They were.
Or were they able to remove all of them?
Yes, out of the hand, but I guess a month later, after all the scabs on my head seemed to heal, there was still a lump. And so I went and had another x-ray, and there was a pellet in my scalp as well. So that got removed.
And when was it that got removed?
It was about a month after, so in August.
Okay. And what did they have to do to remove the one on your scalp?
They just gave me a local anesthetic because it was right under the skin, but there was a lot of scar tissue around it because everything had healed up over it. So they had to just cut around everything and pull it out.
And did you have to have any other follow-up work done for any of those surgeries?
No, I just had to go back to have the stitches in the scalp taken out a couple of weeks later.
And at some point in time, did you learn what had happened to your friend Jesse?
Yes. It felt like a couple of days had passed before we found out, but I've been told it was actually Friday evening. Other co-workers came to the Sproul's house where I was staying because I was only there in a hotel, and they didn't want to send me back there by myself, so they brought me to their house. And so co-workers came and told us that Jesse Childress had indeed died, because until then we weren't certain.
And were you able to attend any services for Jesse?
Yes, they had one on Buckley Air Force Base Forum. I attended that one.
Your Honor, if I may approach the witness with what's been marked as People's Exhibit number 1129.
Yes.
Thank you. Do you recognize that document?
Yes,
And what is that?
it's a diagram of the theater auditorium.
All right, and do you recognize the handwriting on that document?
Yes,
Whose handwriting is it?
it's mine.
All right, and do you see your name on there?
I do.
And do you see a date on there?
Yes,
And what was that date?
15 August 2014.
Did you meet with me previously to draw that diagram?
Yes,
Okay, and does that diagram fairly and accurately represent where you believe that you were seated in the theater and what you observed in the theater on July 19th and 20th of 2012?
yes.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time I would move for admission of that document.
Any objection? No objection. Without objection, People's Exhibit 1129 is admitted and may be published.
Thank you. All right, could you please describe for the jury what you drew on that diagram?
I drew where it has MJDC. That's where myself, Jesse, Derek, and Chi-Chi were sitting, according to my memory. And the other diagonal line is the path that the canister took when it was thrown across the theater, according to what I remember seeing.
Anything else on there?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, and Your Honor, if I may approach with what has been marked as 2571, 2572, 2573, and 2574.
Yes.
Thank you. Do you recognize the person in that photograph?
Yes.
All right, and if you could please tell the jury the number of the photograph that you're looking at.
2571.
And who is the person in that photograph?
Me.
Okay, and do you recall when that photograph was taken?
Yes.
When was it taken?
It was in the children's hospital after the shooting.
All right. And does it fairly and accurately represent what you looked like at the children's hospital? And is that on July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
And if you could tell the jury about the next photograph? If you could state the photograph number first, please.
It's 2572, and it's a picture of the side of my head. That's looks like after they cleaned my face off, but they hadn't washed the blood out of my hair yet.
And was that also taken at the children's hospital on July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
And does it fairly and accurately represent what you looked like that day?
Yes.
All right. If you could tell the jury about the next photograph, please.
It is a 2573. It's a picture of my left hand after they had washed it off. It's the top of my left hand.
Is that also at the children's hospital on July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
Does that fairly and accurately represent what you looked like or your hand looked like on July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
And the next photograph?
Object. I just asked that the foundation be laid before the witness is asked to describe the photograph.
I'm not sure I'm following. Are you objecting to the last question that was asked?
Correct.
Does that fairly and accurately represent what you looked like or your hand looked like on July 20, 2012?
That question, the next sort of direction to the witness, Your Honor, which was, and the next one, which was an indication for the witness to describe the photograph, which will be fine once foundation is laid.
Okay, sustained.
All right, could you please describe what you see on the next photograph and state the number of the photograph first?
The number is 2574, and it's like a picture of the palm of my left hand.
And does that fairly and accurately represent what you look like on July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I would move for the admission of those photographs.
Is there any objection?
No objection to this.
Without objection, all four of those photographs are admitted. That's People's Exhibits 2571, 2572, 2573, and 2574, and they may all be published.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right, thank you. Your Honor, if I may approach with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 4726.
Yes.
Do you recognize the person in that exhibit, or in that document?
Yes.
And who is that person?
It's Jesse Childress.
And is that the person that you were with at the movie theater that night on July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, and does it fairly and accurately represent what Jesse looked like before he was killed?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I would move for the admission of People's Exhibit 4726.
Any objection? No objection. Without objection, 4726 is admitted and may be published.
I have no further questions. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Do you have any questions, Ms. Spengler?
I have no questions for this witness.
All right. There might be a question from the jury, so I'll ask you to wait for just a moment, okay? Thank you. Yes, thank you. All right, would counsel approach, please? Ma'am, the jury has submitted a few questions, and I have ruled, based on the rules of evidence and other applicable rules of law, that 2 of the 3 questions submitted are appropriate, and so I'm going to ask those questions now. The first question is, did you see the shooter walk through the theater?
I did not.
And the next question is, did the shooter say or yell anything?
No, not that I heard.
All right? Any follow-up questions based on those questions, Ms. Tish McGuire? Any follow-up questions based on those questions, Ms. Spengler?
No.
All right, may this witness be released from her subpoena?
Yes.
Any objection?
No.
Okay, thank you very much. Members of the jury, it's 10 after 7, and so rather than start a new witness, I think it makes sense to take our break at this time.
And Your Honor, you just said it was 10 after 7, just
Oh.
for the record.
Sorry. It's 7 after 10, 10:07. I wanted to see if you were paying attention. You are. All right, it's 10:07. So let's take a 20-minute break. I think because we have such a large group, we're going to plan on taking 20-minute breaks when we take breaks. That's in the morning and that's in the afternoon. It's kind of hard to take a 10 or 15-minute break when you have a group this large. So that should give you a chance to relax a little bit and get water, get anything else that you need to get during the break. Please remember all the admonishments I've been giving you throughout. I'm not going to repeat them all at every break. I am confident that you know them by heart by now, and I am confident that you know that they are extremely important and that each and every one of them must be followed. Every single one of them must be followed, and each one of them must be followed by each one of you. And so most of the time I will just remind you right before we go on break about the admonishments and not go through them again. However, every once in a while I will go through them specifically just to make sure that they're fresh in your mind. I want to tell you again that these admonishments are not discretionary. They're mandatory and they're important. And so you shouldn't think in terms of, what's one little thing? What harm is that going to do? There are reasons for each and every one of the advisements, and you have to follow each and every one of the advisements. And you also should not think in terms of, well, who's going to find out? That creates problems. Trust me when I tell you, you have to follow them. We are trusting that you will do this. And it's sort of an honor code thing. We are trusting that all of you are folks who will do this because you've taken an oath to do it. You've sworn to me that you will do it, and I am trusting you that you will do it. And given the folks we have on the jury, I have no doubt that you will do it. So please keep the admonishments in mind and please follow all of them, okay? All right, with that, let's take a 20-minute break and let's have you back at 10:30. Thank you. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury has exited the courtroom. Is there anything we need to take up at this time on behalf of the people? Ms. Tish McGuire? On behalf of the defense, Ms. Spengler?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes.
In regards to juror questions, I know the court numbered
Yes.
the first question with 1, and the defense is just asking that we receive copies at the end of each day?
We'll make a record of them. I'm not sure that we'll be making copies for all of you. Why do you need copies? For a record or for what purpose?
That's correct.
We'll make a record of it. I'm not gonna be having my staff making copies. We'll make a record of all the juror questions. I've also read them into the record, so there's a record of them that way as well.
It's just difficult, Your Honor, being up there and trying to assess the question and then also memorize the question and be able to bring it back.
I don't understand.
Well, I mean, I guess
Are you saying you want a copy before I rule on the questions?
no.
So then
just-
I don't understand what you just said has anything to do with the practice that we follow.
I was just asking for a copy so that the rest of the team could also see the questions that were asked.
That's a different point. Now you're saying you want the other attorneys to see the questions.
Not before the court's ruled on it, but
All right, let me think about that. That's different. I thought you just wanted it for purposes of a record. If you want it so that the other attorneys can see them because they're not up here at the bench, that may be a valid point. Let me think about that and see what I come up with, okay? Mr. Orman, you're standing up?
I'm just standing up too. I agree with what counsel is requesting, and I agree with it for a different reason. The court lost the jury, and the court clerk called our office and said, "Do you have a copy?" And I'm not saying it's going to happen in this case, but that's happened to me numerous occasions where something in the court record is not available for appeal. Most of the time, we'll have a copy because the court gives us copies, so I would request it. It's a backup, Your Honor.
The backup for me, though, is that I'm reading them into the record. So there is a backup already. This would be a backup to the backup. So, and I'm not into making backups to backups. I'm into making backups. I'm fine with backups, but backups to backups is a little much for me. But I will think about it, as I said, and I'll let you know what I come up with, okay?
All I can say is NASA always does a second year, and I think they do it for good reason.
Right? Yeah, this is not NASA, Mr. Orman. All right, thank you, folks. We'll be on break. The court will be in recess. Thank you.